title for this next few minutes is The Unexpected Role of Creativity in Solving the World's Biggest Problems. Now, I wanted to start with this, but I know that would put you to sleep, so here's how we're starting. We're going to come back to this, but I'm going to ask you later about what football and creativity have in common. But before we do that, let's start with the boring but critical fact. This is a slide showing how creativity scores decline over our lifetime. The important point is that over 98% of 3-year-olds are considered creative geniuses. 98%. That means almost everybody in this room, when they were young, was a creative genius. Maybe except for 7 or 8 of us in the room, but we won't try to figure out who they are. So between the ages of 0 and 3, your brain developed in a way, in the playpen or on the playmat and at your high chair, that constantly challenged your brain to find new ways to think of things, new problems to explore, and challenges. Now, if you took this test today, how do you think you'd do? Would you still be a creative genius? You might be, but reality shows us that less than 2% of people over 25 will actually retain that creativity. That's a pretty serious drop. Now, you might not think that that's a big problem, but it is exactly because of this that we lose out as a society on solutions to tackle some of the world's biggest problems. We may not think that the world needs a bunch of advertising executives sitting in soft beanbag chairs, thinking of crazy ideas or wacky creative ideas, but it is this kind of thinking that will help us tackle some of the biggest challenges we face. Let me give you a little example or a story that will illustrate some of the things we're going to talk about these next few minutes. Do you know what this is? I haven't seen one like this in a while. It's a very old saw. There's a story about 2 men who are standing by the side of the road, and they're trying to saw down a tree. Another third man comes by, and he offers an unsolicited opinion. And he says, you know, I see that you're working very hard to cut down this tree. It looks like your saw is quite dull. Why don't you stop and sharpen it? The 2 men look at each other, and one answers right away, we don't have time for that. We don't have time to sharpen our saw, we just have to cut the tree down. They don't have time to take a step back and think about how to create a better solution for this problem they're having, whether it's to sharpen their saw, or to get a new saw, or to go find recycled wood, another solution, whatever it is. They don't have time. They don't have time, we don't have time. We might not say it exactly like that, but that's exactly what we're saying when we don't make time to stop and think about new challenges to old problems. It's this kind of rut or grooves in our thinking that keep us from finding important solutions to the world's ugliest and hairiest problems. And why does this happen? A very drastically damaged educational system forces us over time to continue to think in these grooves because that's how we succeed in many systems, not all, in many educational systems. And so it's only by spending a few minutes on understanding how do we get in these grooves and how do we get out of them that we can be better prepared to tackle some of the world's largest problems. So why do we get into these ruts? Why do we get into these grooves? There are 2 key reasons for this. The slide is actually not, it's coming in a second, but the slide is showing you an example of how we test for creativity. One of the reasons we get into these ruts is that this is the way our brain is built. It is a natural behavior for the brain to think in the same pattern again and again. Imagine for a minute that you're a brain cell. We're all brain cells in this room. If you're learning something new for the first time, you don't exactly know what neighboring cells need that information. So until about the 6th time you hear or see something, you just reach out to all your neighbors. You let everybody know everything, indiscriminately. But because your brain has to become much more efficient at processing signals, it starts to slowly realize, these are the friends that need to know this information. And this group doesn't care. They don't need it. And we become more and more efficient, but we become more close-minded. And we continue to process signals in this direction while ignoring this direction. That is the basis of the efficiency of our brain, which is important for many functions. But it's this efficiency that is the enemy of creativity. It is exactly this efficiency that forces us, over time, to lose the ability to speak to our neighboring cells. So considering that, we can see that creativity is not necessarily something you have or you don't have. How many times have you heard someone say, I'm just not a creative person? They're really creative, but I'm not creative. It doesn't work this way. The reason we're talking about this today is that creativity can be fostered. It can decline, as you saw, but it can really be enhanced. And that's why we're going to focus. We are focusing today on how creativity is at the heart of problem solving. How do we know this creativity can go up and down? And I'm just showing you here some squiggles on a page. There are a lot of creativity tests that exist. This happens to be an example from one of the gold standards. And one of the questions would be something like this, where a subject is shown some squiggly lines. And the test is then to incorporate these lines into a picture of your choosing. So here's just an example. This is not my drawing. You see that the lines have been incorporated into the picture of this bull. And here's another example from the same test. You might get a picture or a page full of shapes, and you're asked then to incorporate that shape into as many different objects as you can. And here's another example of how someone did that here. And these tests are graded according to the number and the originality and the variation between the objects you make. We don't want to spend too much time on it today. I just want to say that there's a science behind how we measure creativity. There are some challenges around it, but there are some gold standards, and this is one of them. And using these tests, we can see what affects our creativity over time. Very important. Using tests like this, we see that our creativity declines as we age. And worse than that, this decline has been getting worse and worse with each decade. Since the 1990s, we as a society have become far less creative. And some have called this the creativity crisis. Probably some of you here in the room have heard of that. This is really a crisis. And why do we think it's a crisis? Or what do we think is contributing to this crisis? You'll never know for sure. We can't really do scientific tests to prove exactly what. But there are two things that we think are really contributing to our decline as we get older. One is certain systems that test us to find the one right answer from the moment we go to school. As the mother of two young boys, I see this already. They're both in kindergarten, and you see that they already are cultivated to think, what is the answer that I have to find, and not what do I need to know to get to that answer? What do I not yet know, and how do I find that out? A second key contributor is social pressure. As we start to go to school, we start to realize that it's not necessarily good to be the only one thinking differently from the others. And so these two things together are really considered among specialists to contribute as we get older to forcing our brain to talk only to that neighbor and ignore the rest. It's interesting because in addition to what I've just said, there's another major reason why we are in this rut, why we stay in this groove. And that's because many of us consider creativity to be associated with the arts. Something about arts and crafts. It's amazing how many times I speak with parents or teachers, and you ask about creativity, and what then follows is a discussion of arts and crafts. And I know that this room is already converted. I'm sure that everyone here understands that. But what's still fascinating is even in a room of people who are very aware about creativity, if you ask the question, how many of you think innovation is important? Almost everyone will raise their hand. Almost no one will dare not to put their hand up. But if you then ask the question about creativity, how important do you think creativity is to succeeding in the world? The hands go tremendously down. Usually around 20 to 30% will leave their hand up. And this is really the crux of the problem. There can be no innovation without creativity. Creativity is not about arts. It belongs in every single subject. And innovation is the application of creativity. It's the result of creativity. Again, I know a lot of people in the room are aware of this. But I think also in this room, a lot of us consider creativity to be something very grand, something we associate with the Nobel Prize or the Pulitzer Prize. And you know, there's everyday creativity all around us. Let me give you two examples. The Post-it note was actually developed by someone who was frustrated sitting in church, whose bookmarks kept falling out of his songbook. And he found a way to create something that would make his life better. He was tired of dealing with it. Seemed small, actually created quite a revolution. Another one is the magnetron, which you might not have heard of, but it's the basis of your microwaves. A magnetron is a tube that uses electricity and magnetism to create heat. And it is a little bit complicated, but what's very funny is that in a weapons factory, these are common. And in a weapons factory where hundreds of people had passed by every day, and hundreds of people had noticed that candy in their pocket had started to melt when they passed by, only one of those people came back with a bag of popcorn. And the rest is history. So the point I'm making is, of course, creativity is all around us. We have to seize the unanticipated opportunities to create it. But you start to see what I'm talking about is there's a certain set of characteristics that define creativity. It's not about art. Art is part of it, but it's not only about expression. It's about openness to new ideas. It's about tolerance for ambiguity. It's about mental fluidity and really hunger to find the difficult path, hunger to find the new challenges. There are many examples, we've shared some of them, about how creativity can be exercised in everyday life. One example in a company is in an engineering group, and it might be relevant for some of us here. One of the ways that we train this fluidity and this tolerance for ambiguity is by constantly seeking out new challenges. And this effect is pretty well studied and pretty well known. It's called the novice effect. It means when you put someone in a new environment, doesn't matter how old, doesn't matter what their experience is, you put someone in a new environment and they think differently. And so one company in the US actually rotates their engineers with every product cycle. They completely swap out their teams so that everyone is faced with new problems. And they found after they did this that their innovation increased 30% in 1 year. There's lots of examples like this, even the most mundane things, not even in a professional setting. There are a lot of ways to do this easily. But I'd like to tell you about sports because I was shocked to hear about this. It makes sense, but I think it's a wonderful story. There was a football team of 12-year-olds, and their coach decided to ask them to train in a very unexpected way. He wanted to build their mental agility. So he trained them during matches, not just in practice, to do the unexpected. They suddenly withdrew from one-on-one challenges to possess the ball, or they played in the wrong direction, or they passed the ball to the opposition. And the coaches from the other side were angry because they thought these kids were trying to cheat. They didn't get it. Now, did they do well? It turns out the first year they lost every match, not a surprise. But the next year, they became the league champions. And they scored much higher on the creativity tests than they did in the beginning. Now, do I say this is the model we should all follow? I can't say. But I think there are thousands of examples of how you can create something unexpected around you to challenge your brain to think in different ways. And that profits the rest of your life. It's not just something that is applicable to that situation. It gets your brain in the training for being much more flexible. So regardless of whether we talk about arts, sports, or other kinds of creative play, could be role play, could be construction, could be story starting, all of these kinds of play are unsurpassed in their ability to stimulate creativity. It doesn't matter what they are, but there is a certain quality for the kind of experiences they stimulate in the people who are engaging in them. And it doesn't matter whether you're a child or adult. That's also important for us to take away today. So what can we do what are some tips here that we can take away for what we can do with our kids or in work? I mean, I think you're starting to see the whole core of this little chat here is about creativity being something we can influence. Again, it's not something we have or we don't have. And the way we live our lives and the way we create the environments for our children can have a big impact. So some things we could do today going home. If you have a young child who's asking why all the time, don't answer because. Don't follow that reflex. Stop and ask, what is it we would need to know in order to answer that question? And how can we find that out? Other simple things. Provide less coloring books and more blank paper. Provide more open-ended toys that provide unlimited expression and creativity. It's not only Lego bricks, but that's part of it. There are a lot of things that we can offer that give the chance for exploration, rather than a lot of toys on the market today that are more closed, that do one thing, one-trick wonders. They're not bad, but they don't provide the same kind of opportunity for exploration that creative play does. And the most important thing we can do, not just with children, but also for ourselves at work, is to have the time. for creativity. We tend to have an urge to fill up every slot. I do it too in the office. I know my team will laugh. But also for kids, filling in activities, wanting them to be exposed to so many things. We've got to balance that with time for guided but free play. That's the root of creativity. What can we do in the office? Time is also part of it, but there's also an instinct that many of us have built up over time, that we like to shoot down ideas in meetings, or we speak immediately when there's a discussion. We don't give ourselves and our colleagues the pause that respects creativity or free thinking. We often tend to just want to get to the solution. Again, it's not wrong, it's a product of our natural behavior and the way the brain works. But challenging ourselves in meetings, challenging ourselves in different situations to take that time and to go against the flow, to zig where others zag, is how it's been called. Not to be hostile to other ideas, but to really take the time and have the mindset to think, what are we missing here? What have we not thought about? Are we taking the path that's easy because it's just in front of us? And these are the things that we can do differently. At the LEGO Foundation, because we're the host of today's conference, we wanted to tell you a little bit about how this all fits together. We believe that creative play and quality learning can change lives. We believe that through high-quality creative play and high-quality playful learning, we can all sharpen our saws. This is kind of the memory for this few minutes of chatting. This is how we would like to contribute, that we help others understand why we need to keep our saws sharp and how we can do that. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to unlock their full potential. And we believe that together we can make this happen now, because never before has the link between creativity, play, innovation, and workforce preparedness and life preparedness, never has the link across all those things been clearer than it is today. In closing, I'd like you to think about that first chart I showed with the declining creativity. And I'd like us to think about today as a call to action. We should be able together to consider how we can reverse that trend that we talked about. We believe that the next time we see a 3-year-old who's staring us in the face with their creative genius, we think about what we've talked about now and what we'll hear about the rest of the day from our distinguished guests. And we remember that we can reverse this trend, and that it doesn't have to be that by the time they reach university, their potential to solve some of the world's biggest problems will decline. Let us reverse that trend together. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and I welcome you to the rest of our program.